She was looking for a husband on an internet dating site, but instead an Oregon woman ended up with herpes. And now a jury has awarded her $900,000 in damages. Abby Gibb explains why.
They met on the internet. She, a 51-year-old dental hygienist. He, a 71-year-old retired dentist. She was looking for a husband. Instead, she got herpes. The woman testified that the first time they had sex, she asked him to wear a condom. He said okay, but the next thing she knew, he wasn't wearing one, and it was too late. Afterward, he broke the news. He had herpes.
This woman sued her ex for giving her a sexually transmitted disease. She won $1.5 million.
Embarrassing TV stories and the resultant lawsuits are very serious and are happening a lot more frequently than you can imagine. Headlines like these clearly demonstrate that sexually transmitted diseases are on the rise, as well as STD transmission cases have been on the rise too.
Approximately 13,500 cases of syphilis were reported last year.
It was on the verge of being an extinct disease in the United States 10 years prior. This means that there is a surge in new cases for this particular STD, and syphilis can be fatal. The other two STDs that have seen a steady rise are HPV and herpes. The STD cases for both of those reach in the millions. There is currently no cure for herpes.
In this Insider exclusive network TV special, our news team goes behind the headlines in Indian Wells, California, to sit down with Shaun Murphy, a partner at the law firm of Slovak, Barron, Empey, Murphy, and Pinkney, who successfully represented Denitra Cahee, a victim of Houston pastor Ralph West II, who knowingly and unlawfully transmitted an STD to Denitra without her knowledge. Ralph Douglas West II, an assistant pastor at the Church Without Walls in Houston, was found liable in the case of D.C. versus Ralph Douglas West II for battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraudulent concealment. The jury's verdict was $2.45 million, which included $1.45 million in compensatory damages and $1 million in exemplary punitive damages, and this is believed to be the largest ever awarded in Texas for a case of this nature. Many states have laws that specifically criminalize exposing another person to HIV, whether or not the virus is actually transmitted. In many states, it's a felony. Throughout his career, Shaun has seen many innocent, hardworking people become victimized by businesses, companies, law enforcement, and other individuals, generally all in the name of selfishness. This case represents one of several trial victories and settlements achieved by Shaun on behalf of victims of genital herpes transmission in the United States. Notably, it marks the largest verdict not only in Texas, but also in the states of California and Washington. Shaun has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in California and across the nation. He makes it his dedicated mission to get legitimate and truthful answers to what really happened to his clients in each case. And because of that, he is driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. Shaun has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continues to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Indian Wells, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce Shaun Murphy to the show. Welcome to the show, Shaun.
Thank you.
We are here today in lovely Indian Wells, and we're going to be talking about an amazing case that you handled. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about your firm.
Sure. We're a firm that's based here in the Coachella Valley. We have 22 lawyers right now. It's a full-service firm, and by that I mean we provide a variety of services to most types of businesses. of all different kinds and sizes. And then we also do, as like this case, some personal injury cases that I handle mostly. But our primary market is towards the business community.
Today we are here talking about one of these personal injury cases, and the name of your client is Denitra Cahee. Tell our audience a little bit about Denitra and how you came to handle this case and meet her.
Sure. Denitra was born and raised in Louisiana, so grew up in the South. Her father was in the production business. He did a lot of work working with churches to put on, a lot of the TV shows and radio shows that you see different pastors and churches put on. And then has primarily been an entrepreneur for most of her adult life. Right now she has a consulting business to other businesses, which has been extremely successful. Denitra came to me after she had found online information about a case that I had previously handled in Dallas. And so she called me, and then we established the relationship that way.
Okay, and what was this case focused on?
This was a case of transmission of sexually transmitted disease without disclosing it to the other person and then transmitting it to her.
Yeah, and specifically, tell us a little bit more about the case. Who was the person that did this?
So the defendant in the case was Ralph D. West, who was an associate pastor at Churches Without Walls in Houston, Texas.
A holy man.
Yes. Church that was founded by his father that he worked in. And they met initially online, like a lot of people do. In this case, it was through Facebook messaging. He had reached out to her. He had seen some of her work. She had been doing some modeling and other things and said he was a fan of hers. They started communicating through Facebook, ultimately translated into text messages, then telephone calls. And then a couple of months later, they ultimately met in person, and then their intimate relationship started after that.
One of the big problems with proving these cases, tell our audience what, it's like he said, she said, but it's really how do you prove that someone was aware that they had a sexually transmittable disease and did not inform the other party?
Right, so there's 4 key elements in all of these cases. As you point out, one, is the person infected? Did they know it? Did they tell the other person? And did they transmit it? The proving the other person had it and the transmission are usually the 2 most difficult things to prove. And you can prove it by a number of ways. In this case, we proved it simply by the fact that he later admitted to her that he was infected and that he knew about it. Sometimes people discover a prescription in the medicine cabinet, and that's how they find out that the other person is infected. But in this case, it was through an admission that ended up getting recorded on audio tape that he knew he had been previously infected.
In this particular case, thank God it was a jury trial, because what it really came down to, who does the jury believe, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Tell our audience a little bit more about the assistant pastor, West. There was, if I remember correctly, a police report.
There was. After Ms. Cahee had gotten infected and had confronted Mr. West about it, he tried to use a few different means to discourage her from going forward with a claim, and some may say, tried to intimidate her. One of those was a night about a year or so after it happened and before we filed suit, where he had gone to her house and they were talking, and he asked her to follow him, back to his house, which she did. So they end up stopping at a gas station because he needed gas. He grabbed the keys out of her car so she couldn't go anywhere. And then a friend of his, who was a former law enforcement officer, showed up with a vest that had, law enforcement identified on the vest. And he was, in a rather stern tone, trying to tell her to stay away from him, leave him alone, stop accusing him of things, stop lying about him. Yeah, and this was, 11, 12 o'clock at night and outside in the gas station. So she ended up calling the sheriff's department and reported it, and a police report was filed on it.
This leads to the next question. You must get, because you have handled several cases like this, people that contact your office, like she found you through online, right? How do you determine which cases to take? Meaning, what are you looking for to decide that this is a credible case?
Sure. Again, we go back to the 4 elements. Are there facts that show me that I can prove this person was infected, that they knew they were infected, they didn't tell you about it, and that you ultimately were infected by this person? And then there's a 5th part, which is not really something we have to prove, but is critical. Do they have sufficient funds to be able to pay a judgment? Because these are not cases that are covered by insurance. Mostly there's homeowners exclusion and other types of STD exclusions on most people's policies.
On homeowners insurance, there's exclusions for that, huh?
It either falls under intentional tort, or some of the more recent policies now specifically have an STD transmission exclusion in them. Yeah, so I tell people, I said, look, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's not much of a benefit to you to get a judgment in any amount against someone that you can't collect, because you have to spend 2 or 3 years going through this process, exposing your personal life, your background, your medical history, and if you can't get anything out of it, it just doesn't make sense to pursue it.
The case ended up with a verdict on behalf of your client. I think it was $2.458 million, correct? Some of it was compensatory, some was punitive. How's that broken down?
So in that particular case, the compensatory damages were roughly $1.7 or $8 million. The punitive was actually $1 million, but it had to be reduced to about $900,000 because of the way Texas law applies to the difference.
They have caps.
Yes, and it's based on a percentage of the actual damages as opposed to the non-economic damages like pain and suffering.
I'm just curious, how long was the jury out once they...
Less than 2 days. They got the case to deliberate on, I think, the afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock. They deliberated the rest of that day, and then the following day, and then the first thing the next morning, they had come back with a verdict.
So you knew that was a good sign?
Yeah, usually the longer it goes in these, it tends to be an indicator that it may go in your favor, because most juries will do sort of like a straw poll, where do we stand? And if all of them were like, yeah, I don't think this is a case, it generally would come back quickly, but it's hard for me to say since I've never lost one of these.
Right, you've done really well. How do you pick a jury for a case like this? Is it mostly women?
No, this particular one I think was split down the middle. Racially, I think we had 2 or 3 African Americans on it. The rest of them were white or Hispanic, which that varies from time to time. That's really just a product of the pool that you get. But you spend a fair amount of time talking them about religion, their morals, their experience in these types of situations. Do you know people that this has happened to before? Has it ever happened to you? And try to get a feel for how they will approach to some of these issues because of the nature of it. Some people have a difficulty sitting and hearing that type of testimony, so you want to try to find that out and let those people leave if they don't feel comfortable in this type of case.
More and more, Shaun, we hear of these types of cases. They're coming out of the woodwork. This has been a problem forever and ever. And a lot of people are afraid to come forward because they're embarrassed, right? Is there a statute of limitations when you can come forward and file a claim?
There is, and it depends on the nature of the claim. So a battery type of claim, assault and battery, or sometimes it's alleged as a sexual battery, those can have a statute of limitations of 1 to 2 years. Negligence would be 2 to 3, depending on which state that you're in. Fraud-based claims, so misrepresenting, telling someone that you're not infected, or fraudulent omission or concealment, again, not telling them that you're infected. That's usually longer, 3 to 4 years, depending on the state. And then there's what's called a discovery rule. So if you were infected but had no reason to know, the statute of limitations wouldn't start until you had some reasonable basis to learn that you'd been infected and by whom.
Really? That can really extend it then, can it?
It can. But most of the times, these cases originate in one of two ways. The defendant gets a case of conscience and tells the person, hey, you know what, I should tell you this, I'm infected. So then you know. Or the person, in 99 times out of 100, it's a woman, has an outbreak and then goes to the hospital or to a clinic or to a doctor for testing. And so that point of knowledge generally is when the statute of limitations would begin to run.
So there is, once you know, there's a legal responsibility informing anybody that you may have sexual relations with, right?
Yes, pretty much every state either has a statute or legal requirement that imposes two requirements, either that you tell the person who may be a potential partner or you refrain from all sexual contact with people who are not infected.
Yeah, let's replace the potential partner definition with a wife or a husband. Wife or husband is cheating, picks up a sexually transmitted disease, gives it to his wife or husband or whatever. How does the law read then?
Either whoever the infected spouse was, they have both a right and an obligation to pursue a claim. You can't...
Even if they're married?
Even if they're married. Statute of limitations will still run. You can't wait until you're divorced 10 years later and say, okay, now I want to sue my spouse for infecting me. Once you know, you have to pursue the claim because there's no longer any legal restrictions between spouses suing each other, which there used to be, decades ago. The interesting thing about that situation is, does the infected spouse have a claim against the third party who they had the affair with?
Yeah, that's an interesting, and do they?
There's been a couple cases. There was one in New York where the woman had an affair with her doctor, and they found there was no duty because the doctor's responsibility was to the patient, not to the husband. There's been a couple others that haven't worked themselves through the system yet. It's an interesting issue, and I think depending on the circumstances, there could be liability.
Are there any cases like this that settle?
Oh, all the time. Actually, the majority of them do.
Because they don't want the negative publicity?
In part that, and also because of just the risk of liability. These are almost always punitive damages claims. So if the defendant has significant wealth, they want to limit the restriction. But what I have found is the cases that have a tendency to settle are the ones where the defendant has some notoriety, celebrity, prominent business person, because they're hoping to keep the information out of the public eye and preserve their reputation.
But that's kind of adverse to the public, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, especially when you have like a Charlie Sheen, right? Who's very promiscuous, or was, right?
Yeah.
What else did you find interesting about this case?
The thing that was interesting about this case, I think the primary was the position of the defendant.
Right, and as assistant pastor.
And the fact that he had used his role in the church as a way of attracting Denitra to him. So he spent a lot of time talking about, being a man of God, morality and a good Christian, and focusing on all of those values. And he would do the same thing when he got up and gave his sermons, and she attended them from time to time.
Yeah, well, let me ask you something, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about clergy sex abuse cases. A man of the cloth abuses someone in the church. The entity on the hook is sued is not only the priest or whatever, and the church. But we were talking off camera a minute ago, and you mentioned, and I mentioned to you that a pastor is really on duty 24/7. He's a shepherd, right? I can call him up at midnight and say, I got a problem, right? He is not acting, or he is acting in the name of the entity that he represents, no?
No, because there's a distinction between his personal behavior and his pastoral duties. If someone called him up and said, I really need counseling or help, and he's being contacted in his role as a pastor, and he goes to someone's house and there's some kind of assault, or in this case, a transmission, he's there on church business as, you know, as a representative of the church. But at some point, everybody has their personal time. And so in this particular case, he was interacting and communicating with her primarily in his personal capacity. So it's hard to link his behavior with that of the church because he wasn't acting on the church's behalf.
Yeah, I'm curious, how has this affected his standing in the church?
It's interesting because the story received a lot of local publication almost immediately after it first came out. And there was a period of time where references to him on the church website and social media had been scrubbed. But he's still there, and he's still an assistant pastor. And
it kind of reminds me of Jimmy Swaggart, who was arrested the third time, I think right in Palm Springs here, for solicitation of a prostitute, right? And I remember when he got on camera, this is finally when they dumped him off the Trinity channel, he said, great acting job. He said, he was crying and he looked up and he says, Lord, I have sinned because I tried to be like you. And he almost got away with it.
yeah.
You don't see him anymore, but anyway. Are these cases, you're being contacted, I mean, this is going to be nationwide. Are these cases that you like representing the people who have been unfortunately infected? I
do. This kind of goes back to one of the reasons why I wanted to be a lawyer when I was in my teens. It is the type of case where you feel like you are giving justice to people who have no real opportunity to protect themselves, who have been betrayed, whose lives have been changed pretty much forever. So I do enjoy these a lot.
Congratulations on the verdict.
Thank you.
We assume it's going to be upheld, and keep us informed on that. And thank you for being on the show.
I will. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.